A very good afternoon for those in East Asia. Very good morning, very good evening if you are in other parts of the world. My name is Alfredo Perdiguero. I'm the Director for Regional Cooperation in the Southeast Asia Department of the Asian Development Bank. It is my pleasure to welcome today to our distinguished speakers and to all of you that are in attendance to this Digital Transformation with Cloud webinar. Today also marks the official launch of the ADB Amazon Web Services and Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia Policy Webinars Series. As you all know, the COVID-19 pandemic significantly accelerated digital transformation in Asia, with companies and governments rapidly adopting cloud computing as they shift to remote and virtual modes of working and service delivery. According to the global market intelligence firm International Data Corporation, IDC, the public cloud services market in the Asia Pacific, if we take out Japan, will reach $160 billion by 2026. In Southeast Asia alone, IDC expects the public cloud services market to grow to 11 billion by 2025, a 5 years compound annual growth rate of over 20%. Cloud computing rapid expansion has delivered greater cost efficiency and improved the experiences of customers and citizens. Let me put a few examples of this. An ADB study published last year, for example, found that Singapore's Land Transport Authority achieved cost savings of 60% by adopting cloud computing for web hosting, in comparison to establishing and maintaining their own server infrastructure. The same study also illustrated how the Philippines Department of Information and Communications Technology was able to streamline operations and improve efficiency after it used a cloud-based solution to automate its business permits and licensing system. This enabled actually local government units to process business permits applications and renewables online, reducing the time from 2 or 3 days to up to even 30 minutes in some cases. Similar success stories can be found in the private sector. For example, another ADB study also highlights the experience of Indonesia's bill payments startup, IOPOP, which was able to control the cost using its cloud computing services, automated services. With this new cloud computing, only 2 engineers were needed to maintain the infrastructure even as the operations were expanding. In the Republic of Korea, this is another good example. Hmong, a platform that connects buyers and sellers of freelance services, has used cloud computing to drive its growth. Today, actually, Hmong is the country's leading business services marketplace with 170,000 registered experts and more than 1 million transactions in 2019. As governments in the region build on this momentum and drive their digital transformation at scale, the benefits of cloud needs to be fully harnessed to capitalize on recent advances in adjacent technologies. Artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, and other Industry 4.0 solutions relied on the use of cloud technology. This is why it's actually imperative for countries to have a cloud policy framework in place to ensure the success of their digital transformation journeys. In addition, by moving workloads into the cloud or building cloud-native solutions, digital infrastructure can be consolidated, maintenance can be made more efficient, and building facilities can be optimized to reduce harmful climate impacts. Given these advantages, we felt that it was very important and timely to provide an opportunity for our government counterparts and other stakeholders to learn how they can better maximize the benefits of cloud adoption. It is also very important to identify and address challenges with cloud migration, including technical barriers, capacity challenges, as well as policy concerns about data governance, data protection, and security and privacy. The ADB, AWS, and also area policy webinar series will explore how the cloud and forward-thinking, pro-innovation digital policies can accelerate countries' digital transformation. The series will specifically focus on 3 key areas: healthcare, sustainability, and financial services. At today's webinar, distinguished panelists will discuss how governments and organizations can accelerate their own cloud adoption, and will highlight best practices in transitioning to a cloud-first environment. I would like again to thank my ADB colleagues, Amazon Web Services, and the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia for organizing today's webinar and the overall policy webinar series. And a special thanks to all of you that are attending and have joined us today. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce today's featured speaker. Miss Agne Makauskaite. She is actually the head of public policy for regulated industries at the Asia Pacific and Japan AWG. Agne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alfredo. Good afternoon or good day, as Australians say. I'm based currently in Sydney, so approaching you in Australian language. So it is a pleasure and a big honor for me to be here today presenting to all of you. And yes, thank you very much. I think the slides are up there. So I would like to talk today a little bit about the concept of cloud and how cloud helps with the digital transformation of the public sector entities and governments, and also digital inclusion, but also to talk a little bit about the best practices in the policy shaping that supports and facilitates such cloud adoption and digital transformation. So we can move to the next one. So to start with, how do we define cloud computing? So really it is the on-demand delivery of IT resources via the internet with pay-as-you-go pricing. So instead of owning, managing, procuring your own IT infrastructure or equipment or data centers, you really can access the cloud technology services such as data compute capabilities, data storage, databases, and a lot of other services on as-needed basis. And really, it's not just storage, right? It offers capabilities, as Mr. Alfredo was mentioning earlier, offers capabilities such as machine learning and artificial intelligence. It allows for data analytics capabilities, monitoring the data use, also security services such as data encryption, managing access to such data, and similar. So now, why cloud? If we can move to the next slide. Why do governments and other public sector players choose to use cloud? So these are a lot of organizations around the world that are currently asking not if cloud, but when cloud, and are moving more and more workloads to the public cloud. Now, why does that happen? It really increases their agility. It offers nearly unlimited scalability. So ability to scale up those resources as required or scale down when they no longer are needed. It also improves the security of the data and operational resilience of those organizations and lowers the costs. So moving to the cloud for public sector organizations really allows them to innovate much faster and focus too on what really matters for their stakeholders and adding the value to their citizens. So if we can move on to the next one. So how does cloud accelerate digital transformation? So governments, nonprofits, education entities, or health service providers and other public sector players all face really unique challenges with limited resources. And digital transformation helps to integrate technology into their specific objectives and focus on that value that they bring to the citizens and their stakeholders. So greater efficiency that we discussed, greater insights into the data use, greater innovation. It also allows to share the data pools across different types of public services to citizens. Now, another area is digital inclusion, and I wanted as an example to mention the social impact and digital inclusion focus that cloud allows for in financial services sector. So working, for example, with microfinancing entities or fintechs and startups that focus on funding the unprivileged communities or small and medium enterprises, focusing on unbanked or underbanked communities. That's just an example of the digital inclusion focus supported by cloud. And in addition to that, and really fundamentally, we hear that a lot from our customers in the public sector, that cloud is fundamentally more secure than on-premises IT, and it allows for public sector organizations to be more operationally resilient when managing such data. And that is mostly because cloud providers typically invest substantially in state-of-the-art security services and infrastructure, which allows for that operational resilience to happen. So a few examples that I wanted to share with you today, and that's in addition to what Mr. Alfredo mentioned already on Philippines, Singapore, and Korea examples. So one example from India, if we can move to the next slide, Manny, thank you. Oh, apologies, wrong slide. Okay, so I wanted to talk also about sustainability of the cloud. So one of other areas why the governments are typically now looking into the cloud is to be more sustainable. And that is in light of all the carbon savings or carbon neutrality goals that governments are now increasingly establishing as part of their macroeconomic goals. So cloud, and that is done actually, that is confirmed by the 451 or S&P Global Market Intelligence study done in 2021, where they looked at various IT resource uses in Asia Pacific across different sectors, including public sector. And they confirmed that in Asia Pacific region, moving public sector and enterprise workloads into the cloud reduces the energy consumption and related carbon emissions by 78%. And this is because cloud data centers are typically almost 5 times more energy efficient compared to on-premises IT systems. So that's another area why the governments are looking increasingly into the public cloud use. If we can move on, yes, and that is exactly the example I wanted to talk about. So that is an example of the digital inclusion. It's a little company, a fintech actually in India called Lending Card. And it's a fintech that provides the micro loans to various micro, small, and medium enterprises in India. And they're using the machine learning algorithms to support that. So basically, they have been operating since 2015. All of their systems are running in the cloud. And they basically, since 2015, when they launched, they have now distributed more than $1 billion in loans in India alone. And they use public cloud capabilities for loan management and for credit scoring, specifically relying on machine learning services. And right now, if you use those services, so for example, you can get the loan now in 72 hours that they're insured by the use of cloud. So that's one of the examples of financial inclusion. If we move on, the next one I wanted to share with you that is from the government of the Bali provincial government, and that is related to COVID use case, where basically Bali provincial government, during the lockdowns and restrictions for the government officials to come into the offices, decided to use cloud to help the officials and public sector workers to access the government systems and government data online. So to introduce the virtual work environments, and also to manage the attendance systems and monitor their performance by using cloud capabilities. So if we can move on, the next, what I wanted to talk to you about is the policy considerations. So how can policymakers and best practice policies support the adoption of cloud and digital transformation? Can we move, Mani, to the next slide? Thank you. So to start with, the best practices that we have seen working with various governments in the region is starting with the cloud first or cloud native policies, or cloud by default. There are various definitions of those policies across the world and in our region. And these are basically policies that require the public sector players, the institutions, to adopt public cloud whenever they consider procuring new IT resources. And that is typically for new projects, but also for existing projects, so migrating the existing IT systems. Now, that basically translates into a general strategy that the government imposes or introduces across the public sector. But also, as part of that, it is really important that there are other policies issued and put in place to support the actual practical implementation of such cloud first or cloud native policy strategies, right? And typically such statements don't really work in practice unless they're backed up or supported by these policies. And I wanted to talk about these four pillars of the policies that support the actual implementation and in practice. So one is security and cloud accreditation. So it's really important that when the governments impose the cloud accreditation, they really rely on international standards that cloud providers can be accredited to. And an example I wanted to mention, for example, a Singapore multi-tier cloud security standard, MTCS, that was introduced in Singapore for all public sector, where cloud service providers need to be accredited. And it is based on ISO 27001. That's just one example, but all these accreditation systems, typically if they're based on global standards, that makes the process really smooth. Secondly, data privacy and control policies. These are the policies that typically acknowledge cloud and are cloud friendly and support cloud adoption and security of cloud in the public sector. Thirdly, it is data very clear, risk-based and outcomes-driven data classification systems, where data classification policies that allow the public sector players to categorize the data based on sensitivity. And then depending on the tiers and categories that they put the data under when they migrate that data to the cloud, they respectively are able to select specific security controls. And fourth, it is cloud contracting and procurement. It is really important to have systems in place that allow very easy procurement processes for the institutions to procure cloud, and also recognize pay-as-you-go model. And that is typically the CapEx versus OpEx conversation, right? Which typically needs to be acknowledged in such procurement systems. That's, for example, the whole of government agreements that some of our governments have in the region. So if we move to the next slide, just really last and sort of a summary slide that I have here. When we work with various governments around the policies supporting the digital transformation in the public sector, what is really important is, of course, to have those cloud first or cloud native or by default policy statements or strategies, which would be put across the government entities. On top of that, it's really important to have risk-based and outcomes-driven approaches on data governance, on data security and privacy policies or data classification and risk management policies that allow for institutions to be flexible in categorizing the data and suggesting the controls. And then thirdly, it is supporting the global standards and cloud-centric accreditations. This is what I mentioned previously, is that when you're accrediting cloud service providers to provide services to the government entities, it's important that those systems are really cloud-friendly and are based on global standards. And fourth, last but not least, it is really important for the governments to play a proactive role in clarifying, in promoting the cloud, but also clarifying any misconceptions in the policies or regulations that the government entities might have when using the cloud. We are hearing from some of our customers often that they're not entirely sure whether cloud is allowed for some of the workloads or what processes they need to follow when adopting the cloud. It is really important when the government and policymakers in particular play that proactive role in supporting and clarifying such queries. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be talking to you today. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I would like to hand over to Ms. May-Ann Lim, the Director of Fair Trade Institute and member of Access Partnership, to lead us to the panel.
Thank you, Agne. My name is May-Ann, and yes, I am the director of the Fair Tech Institute, not Fair Trade Institute, and also the Emeritus Director of the Asia Cloud Computing Association. I really want to welcome you all to this discussion on digital inclusion in the cloud. I'm really enthused. I'm really happy to see that people have already started to find the Q&A section in our little panel, which means that people are asking questions. Thank you, Arthur, for your really detailed question. We were discussing a little bit earlier as the panel met earlier about the questions that usually come into these discussions, and we love the fact that everybody's asking really specific questions on cloud, which actually shows the maturity of folk who are on in the discussion. I believe that we have about 900 over people who are registered for the session, and I'm hoping that everybody has joined. At this point in time, I wish to welcome my panelists who are, I hope, have already joined us, and I would love to invite all of you to switch on your cameras so that we can all have a look at you and meet you as well. Miss Mary Joy Abueng, the President of the National ICT Confederation of the Philippines. Mr. Thomas A. Bell, Advisor for the Digital Technology for Development in ADB. Mr. Tahir Hashmi, the VP of Growth Engineering at Tokopedia, and Dr. Bonnie Fessis Wahyu Putjianto, or Dr. Bonnie as I will call him, who is the Director of ICT Empowerment at Indonesia's MIC. Welcome everybody to the discussion. All right, so all of you who are part of the audience, I've just introduced all of them. They come from different parts of the Asian region and also different sectors of the economy. So I would like to invite you, if you have questions, please do drop them into the Q&A section. We will be attempting to interact with you via the Q&A, which means that if you've got a question, I will try to integrate it into some of the questions that we ask our panelists and also try and answer to you. We have been doing a lot of these educational work within these webinars. So again, we're very, very happy to be answering the questions to you. Today, our discussion really is on digital inclusion in the cloud. And I know Mary Joy, Tom, Mr. Tahir, and Dr. Bonnie, you have been working really, really hard on ICT empowerment, digital empowerment through the cloud. So question number one, the first question is really, please introduce yourself, tell us and tell our audience members, what are your top three picks, top three ways in which you have seen cloud enhancing digital transformation and digital inclusion during the course of your work. I'm going to hand the time to Dr. Bonnie first, and then Mary Joy, Tom, and then Tahir. So Dr. Bonnie, the floor is yours. Do introduce yourself and tell us what are your top three picks. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Bonnie has not logged in just yet. I'm sorry, I'm toggling through a lot of different windows on my screen right now. Mary Joy.
Good afternoon, Marianne. So I am Mary Joy Abueg, the president of the National ICT Confederation of the Philippines, founded in 2008 as the umbrella of local and international ICT councils of the Philippines, of which I am also the president as one of the local, which is the Palawenyo ICT Association. So NICP, our organization, is a multi-stakeholder organization composed of local government, academe, and business community or support groups. Or simply, we call it as MAGIC, like making academe, government, and industry collaborate. So NICP primary objective is to develop a local ecosystem in terms of infrastructure, talent, and business environment suitable for the information technology and business process management industry and the opportunities of the digital economies. I am also a professor at Palawan State University and at the same time the data privacy officer of Palawan State University. So the top 3 ways for me that I have seen cloud enhancing digital transformation and digital inclusion efforts is first, it improves the business ecosystem. Then it is effective and efficient utilization of ICT or information and communications technology when it comes to flexibility, security, and cost efficiency. And third, it also helps the government when it comes to sustainability of data and strengthening the e-governance.
Thanks, Mary Joy. That sounds like something which you have definitely put a lot of thought into in all of your multiple roles. I'm super impressed at how much of a superwoman you are. Thank you, Mary Joy. Mr. Tahir, how about for yourself in what's happening in Indonesia?
Hey, thanks, Marianne. Hi, I'm Tahir. I'm Senior VP of Engineering at Tokopedia. So Tokopedia is an Indonesian technology company with a mission to democratize commerce through technology. And on our e-commerce platform, we have more than 800 million products that are sold by more than 12 million merchants. And interestingly, 4 out of 5 merchants or sellers that are on our platform are first-time entrepreneurs. And we also have a digital commerce platform where we have more than 40 digital products in Indonesia. And we serve 99% of the locations in India, which is actually the world's largest archipelago country with more than 17,000 islands. Besides my role at Tokopedia, I'm also the CTO of Dekara, which is a startup, technology solution startup, where our goal is to help other startups with their scalability, reliability, and security of their cloud applications. And I also happen to contribute a chapter on cloud migration in a book called Cloud Strategy by Gregor, who is one of the AWS enterprise strategists. So yeah, you can know that I kind of love public clouds. And the reason for that is that basically the cloud, through my years of experience with clouds, it has always helped us, focus on our core mission, bringing the solutions for our customers, for our audience, rather than getting tangled in a lot of deep technical challenges. And the other, aspect of being able to use cloud solutions is that, it brings a higher level of reliability. These cloud solutions are usually very well managed from professionals, and that again helps us improve the quality of our technology offerings.
Thank you, Tahir. So reliability, increased scalability, and the ability, I think, to ensure that all of your customers are happy, I think it's probably the core thing for Tokopedia.
Yep.
Thank you for that. And Thomas, I apologize. Yes, your turn to tell us a little bit about your successful series telling us all about cloud that we're part of right now, and the work that you're doing within ADB.
Great, thanks. And our role in ADB is basically to support the digital transformation of our developing member governments. And we also support ADB staff and ADB programs with, with digital transformation, and cloud is really at the core of that. And I would say, where I think cloud is really enhanced digital transformation is first at the fundamental layer, that cloud represents a new layer of infrastructure for the whole world, for computing and telecommunications, as just, I'd say, a foundational layer that's become essential. And I started my career in Silicon Valley, and you really see it there with the startup ecosystem. And now that's being, basically expanded throughout the world. Every one of our developing member governments is looking to build a robust startup ecosystem. And that is just essential to have cloud as a fundamental layer. You really can't start a startup today without starting with a cloud provider, because you just don't want to build that infrastructure as a startup company. I mean, I could see governments and large companies taking their time, but startups can't do it. And then the bottom line also is that cloud has created the opportunity for digital jobs to go everywhere. And this is probably the most fundamental thing, that we need to get jobs to people, because the advances in technology, we always say how they cause jobs to be outdated and people lose their jobs because of technological innovation. But on the other hand, digital jobs are appearing as quickly as traditional jobs are disappearing, and the cloud is really what enables that to go everywhere, not just to be in certain leading city centers and that sort of thing. So I think that's really important for digital transformation, especially in emerging countries.
Thanks, Tom. That's really important for us to focus on, because indeed it is an enabling technology for digital economies, or economies which are moving towards the digital side of things, to ensure that there is that balance between people being scared of that change and giving that change a chance and opportunity to show that you can actually benefit from it, for sure. I'd like to turn our attention a little bit before our next question to some of the questions which I see popping up, which are pretty interesting in the Q&A. We've got two questions which I'm going to call out right now, because this is always one that always trips everybody up. I think there are 2 or 3 questions on data sovereignty, okay? Mr. Reza Nazamuddin asked, what are the policy recommendations to address data sovereignty? Agne, I know you're still online. We might actually call you up just to ask if you have a solution for this. That's a question. Similarly, Mr. Iqbal Akbar asked, many projects with the Indonesia government will require data servers located inside the country due to privacy and sensitivity. How do you see this trend? Is this also happening in other regions? Will this lead to more construction of data centers in the country? This is a really, really big question. So that's something which I do want to highlight. We also have a question from Grace on international certifications and how the cost of third-party certifications might be too steep. So these are some of the questions that I want to just highlight. We might want to cover this, but in the meantime, I want to welcome Dr. Bonnie from Indonesia's ComInfo, who has just joined us. I appreciate you joining us and being here, Dr. Bonnie. Dr. Bonnie, you are here just in time for us to ask the second question to everybody, which is that again, many organizations want to move to the cloud, but they struggle a little bit when it comes to how to move to the cloud. And this actually is a question that Mr. Alvin Marcello has. Many organizations are getting interested to transition to the cloud, unfamiliar about how to go about it. Is there a standard process that enterprises can follow when they want to begin their cloud journey? I think that we have, between all of us, have seen a number of opportunities and perhaps piloted even some projects where governments or departments or a small enterprise or a small group has moved to the cloud. So Dr. Bonnie, from your opinion, maybe you want to have an opportunity to introduce yourself and then maybe share a little bit about what you think are the building blocks and some of the challenges. Itu mute button.
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot to unmute. So first of all, I do apologize since I just recently got the message that it's supposed to be my Director General for Informatics, Mr. Pangerapan. But unfortunately, just recently called by Minister to be accompanied him during the special session. So I in charge of him to give a little bit moderation on this, not moderation, but at least in charge of him in this discussion. So back to the question on how the government organization responds to the cloud journey and the building blocks. Let me answer like this. Here, before that, let me introduce myself, because you said I have to introduce before I begin this discussion. So my name is Boni Pujianto. I'm the director for Informatics empowerment in the Ministry of Communication and Informatics. So I deal with the informatic empowerment related to ICT, or we call it digital literation. And then the second one is encouraging and build the startup ecosystem in Indonesia. So back to the question. Actually, there are three building blocks that imply to the cloud government. I said cloud government because we deal with the government sector, but this is also give a benefit to the business sector. First, we have, as a government, we have to provide the policy. This is the most crucial part. It consists of a comprehensive policy that could elevate the whole nation. And this policy should be made by all the stakeholders, we call it multi-stakeholders approach. So once the policy are established, then I'm sure all the stakeholders will also support and give a strong contribution to our policy. Secondly, in spite of the policy is very common, we call it infrastructure. This is very essential because we know Indonesia is very huge. The inequality in terms of different capital and then different geographies, many islands. So we need an infrastructure to cover all those archipelago. So we collaborate between the private and the public sector. And we also open model of PPP, public-private partnership. And the third is, last but not least, is human resources skill. After the infrastructure and the policy has been set up, and human resources, or we call it human capital, is the main driver of all this. We understand technology always updating. So we also need to upgrade people in terms of digital skills by providing class, workshop, training, and everything. And from the Ministry of Communication and Informatics, we provide such as digital talent scholarship every year, almost, if I'm not mistaken, around 2,000 scholarship, but maybe more nowadays. This is because we need more than, I forgot the number, 60,000 new digital talent. So we have to push our resources to increase number of digital talent in Indonesia. Okay, I think that is the overall information from our side. Back to Anne.
Thank you, Pak Boni. I think that that's definitely, if you are managing a country, that's where Pak Boni is coming from, focusing on getting all different stakeholders involved, which is actually, I think, a good idea in general. But that infrastructure build out is definitely something which is very focused for governments, and also HR skilling up. I think this is a very, very key message for a lot of us across the region. My nephew just asked me about jobs in the telecommunications sector, so that's definitely high up on our minds. Then I think that I'm going to turn the time over to Thomas to see if you have anything to add to this. What are some of the challenges and what are some of the building blocks that you can see are needed for this movement into the cloud? Because I do see that, again, there are some questions around what's actually needed if we want to be moving to the cloud. What are some of the recommendations there?
Sure, thanks, Mayan. I would say I agree with Dr. Boni that it starts with skills, especially as a government. Governments need to have, I've worked with a lot of governments, and traditionally they have an old school IT department that is resistant to change because they have, job security questions. And in order to attract talent and to get on that bandwagon or get on the roadmap of cloud, you really have to have the right skills. And it's hard to just retrain everybody in your IT department. So really going to the universities, bringing in people with the latest skills, because nowadays people learn these skills in university. But then there's another side of it, which when governments hire cloud specialists, they never stay. They leave after 2 years because they can get a better job in the private sector, and governments hate that. But in fact, it's actually good for the country. The government can be a temporary training ground for the next generation. And you have to look at that as an advantage, not as a disadvantage. And that's very tricky because, governments hate to have to hire new people and lose their best talent, but that's really what you want to see happen. And then lastly, this question about data privacy and sovereignty and competition is very important. Every government has to grapple with it because there are basically 3 or 4 global providers, and that's not going to change for a long time. And how you decide which one to go with, which 2 to go with, and you're making a long-term commitment when you go with one provider, and you have to have a really solid, process for working with that provider to make sure that the competitive elements are there and that they can follow the laws that your country has and policies that are going to change. And it's a long-term commitment, and it's difficult as a politician, to make those decisions with all the public scrutiny. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Tom. I think that starts to answer John Paulo Esguera's question. How can you be sure that cloud vendors will keep your data safe as privacy rules get tighter? I think that is something which can't be outsourced. You're still responsible for the data just because it's like if you have a child and you hire a nanny. I mean, yes, you should be making sure that the nanny is responsible and doesn't, mistreat your child, but ultimately you are still responsible for the child. You can't just say, oh, well, I outsource my child care to somebody, and I'm sorry, that's that person's responsibility. You're not going to be doing that. So in terms of how can you be sure that cloud vendors keep your data safe as privacy rules get tighter and everything, I think what Thomas has mentioned is absolutely really important. We just want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on our vendors for sure. Tahir, I can go to yourself for your opinions. And we're moving slowly but surely into the private sector. So hopefully some of the answers will get a bit more directed.
Yeah, I think as a sort of like a cloud practitioner, one of the biggest challenges that I have experienced is the organization's mindset around the ownership of that technology. And basically, the sooner that the organization accepts that moving to the cloud is essentially outsourcing the infrastructure and a lot of the software operations aspects, the easier it becomes to then start working on the transformation itself, right? So if I have to give an example of it, it's like the difference between owning your own vehicle, your own car, versus hiring a taxi and so on, right? Of course, a taxi can never be the same as your private car, but can it be a substitute? Of course, yes, it can be. And then there is public transport infrastructure as well, which you do not own, but you utilize. So being able to think in those terms, wherein you're not really owning things, but you're actually outsourcing or renting, and then also figuring out what are the boundaries. Like, I think we just had a very interesting discussion about data privacy being the company's responsibility. Actually, there are boundaries that you can set, that this is my responsibility versus this is the cloud provider's responsibility in sharing that overall data security aspect, right? So, I mean, if you look at the building blocks that the cloud provides, there are, at the very basic level, there is infrastructure as a service where you're renting hardware and outsourcing the maintenance of that hardware, but nothing else, right? So you're entirely responsible for all of the software stack that you're running on that hardware. And then the responsibility of that the cloud provider in that case is keeping your data safe from other customers on their cloud and making sure that some basic disk encryption and so on, those policies are maintained, but you're still responsible for making sure that your data is safe. And then you move on to the next level, which is platform as a service, where you not only outsource the hardware, but also the software operations, all the production operations. And I think this is one area where the big data processing is a very good example of platforms as a service, where there's a lot of advancement and a lot of capability that startups, especially cloud native startups and companies, are able to leverage simply because they do not have to provision a lot of hardware. They do not have to run their own machine learning or algorithms and so on. All of that is provided as a well-managed offering. And then lastly, there is software as a service, which is you don't even want to build the software yourself. You just want to use it, right? And you only pay for the functionality that you're using. So these are all the building blocks that are available. Basically, from the organization's perspective, the sooner that you start going into that mindset, which is, I do not, as an organization, I do not want to own these certain aspects of my technology. And these are the things that I want to be responsible for versus not be responsible for. And then choosing, which layer of the cloud stack you want to, target. Things become a lot easier in terms of then starting to work on a transformation or a migration strategy.
Thank you, Pak Tahir. I think that's really good insight. And I do want to highlight to our participants who are in the audience some of the questions that people have asked. I think that the assumption is that there is one decision to make, which is, should I move my organization onto the cloud or not onto the cloud? I think that it's quite scary to need to move, for example, your whole house. I think that what you want to try to do is do a couple of pilots here and there as a first step. As Tahir mentioned, I think it's important. Tahir, you mentioned that you need to be responsible for choosing which pieces you want to move and choosing what you want to be responsible for before you can start to choose a deployment model. And I think that that's really an important first step, I would say, understanding the architecture of your system. I guess in the country, you would need to understand, okay, which ministries you have, which provinces that you have, which states you have in the first instance administratively, and within a private organization, which department I think it's ready to move, which data would you like to, and which processes perhaps which are not so sensitive that you may want to pilot on cloud first. I think that would probably answer Alvin Marcello, I think your question on, is there a standard process? I think that the first process is probably survey your company first and have a look at what you have and what can you test out. So I hope, Alvin, that is something which is helpful. Alvin also has said that it's in the the context of coming from a large on-premise operations and not starting from scratch. I think that it's still relevant. So thank you, Pak Tahir, for that insight from Tokopedia. Mary Joy, how about your experience in the Philippines?
Okay, in the Philippines, it's very advantage to cloud sellers out there because in the countryside, still not yet developed. A lot of organizations are not moved to cloud. So it's an opportunity for them to promote the cloud within other areas in the countryside and the emerging cities. No? And another thing is that we all know that how flexible when it comes to security and cost, no, it is effectively address the continuing cybersecurity concerns. And of course, we all know that cloud safeguard against breach. No, however, what Thomas says, there's a resistance to change. So yeah, I agree with her that we need to change the mindset of our administrators. So we also need to equip them about the advantages. So it's more on awareness, as well as the capacity development. Okay, so in the Philippine setting, we started with the cloud first policy. Then again, amended it to the policy is amended in order to reduce costs, increase employee productivity, and develop an excellent citizen online services. So those are the things that the steps that the government in the Philippines started on how to, how to go on with the cloud. And however, there are also challenges, like when it comes to security, like misconfiguration of instances, then like the open buckets, the conflict between the national law, and moreover the privacy regulations. So since there are different residency, like for example, there's a different policy in the Europe, like they are under the GDPR, while in the Philippines there is a Data Privacy Act. So it differs from one country to another country, or different laws. So another thing is the cost in case something goes wrong. For example, your resources consumed by bugs, or in its scripts or software running on cloud. So that will be another example. And the main shortage sometimes here in the Philippines of IT products. Those are the compelling reason. A shortage of IT products, and then the gray area, which is related to the problems like the fluctuating of electricity. So fluctuating of electricity, slow and intermittent internet, so the internet stability. Imagine here in the Philippines, we still practice queue or lining up in order to have the government services. So once if it's offline, you wait there in the office until the office will go online. So that's the main challenges: electricity and slow and intermittent internet.
Thanks, Mary Joy. Yes, I think those are some really, really core things. I do want to pick up a couple of things that you mentioned, and they're again related to the questions. That's this question about conflict of laws, and it's again very related to the data sovereignty issue. A lot of countries are indeed putting in place data sovereignty requests and requirements, and I think that the question is, how do we then therefore deal with this? Because does this mean that every country is going to have to build a data center, have to have more and more data centers? In the first instance, cloud compute, the use of cloud computing actually is supposed to help you outsource this stuff. I live in Singapore, okay, and we don't have a lot of land. We're a very small country. If we had to build a data center for everybody to house everybody's data, I think we would not have space for human beings to live already. So I think that there are data sovereignty requirements in the first instance, but in the second instance, Mary Joy, your question around your point around the conflict of laws, this is exactly where we're seeing a lot of questions, because if we don't have something like data classification, which is a slide that Agne showed a little bit earlier. One of the things you'll have to do before you move on to the cloud is making sure that you have proper data classification, so that in the first instance, you don't overpay for things that aren't really critical that you need to store, for example, within the country. So I think that that's the first step. The second step is you need that data classification also, so that you can, for example, understand that you have European citizen data, and therefore you would this class of data has to be treated in a particular different way. So to try and answer some of the questions which generally ask, what do we do now? The answer is you need to consult your lawyers, because there's quite a lot of legal ramifications. And as Mary Joy very rightly pointed out, a lot of those legal questions are actually within your own country. There may be a conflict between the national law and the local law. And I see Thomas and Pak Boni also nodding. So I think that this is not something which is unknown. It's a little bit of a challenge for sure. One thing is definite. We are moving into an era where we are more concerned about that personal data. We are more concerned about the types of data that we are sharing around. I would say, writ large, we haven't quite figured it out completely yet. We're on the way. So if you're very interested in talking about this, I would really suggest that you get involved with a lot of the stakeholder discussions. I know a lot of governments are putting out draft consultations. Please respond to them and bring them out. And that harkens back, I think, to Pak Boni, what he mentioned earlier about, you need to have multi-stakeholder discussions when it comes to discussing around technology policy. So those are really core components. On something which Mary Joy also mentioned regarding the cost, in case something goes wrong, I think that this is a business opportunity for people who are doing insurance, isn't it? It's a cost of cybersecurity insurance. I hear is a big part of the economy now. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm gonna pause to see whether, before I move on to the third question, to see whether any of our panelists have anything to add to things which have been said, and also to see whether anybody would like to pick up on any of the questions that have been asked within the Q&A to pick up and answer, because I think that there are some interesting questions there, particularly around data privacy and geopolitical tensions. Would any of our panelists like to answer anything? Not quite right now. All right, then we will move on to our third and final question before I will seriously focus on answering the questions. A lot of organizations what are three instructions, three takeaways that our audience members can take away from them that can facilitate or encourage cloud adoption or address some of those challenges which we spoke about earlier? And I think that we did speak about quite a lot of challenges. I think that we do have jurisdictional challenges, we do have geopolitical challenges here, we do have other issues around making sure that outsourcing is done in a responsible and effective way. So do you have three best practices that you can perhaps share with us? We'll go to Tom first, and then Dr. Boni, Mary Joy, and then Pak Tahir to this. So Tom, would you like to share a little bit with us your top three advice?
Yes, just really quick. I would say I think the cloud first policy is very helpful, even though it's hard to be idealistic, but really does help get things moving. And then second, talent pipeline. You really have to work on that as a government. Obviously small startups can't focus on that, but for governments you really have to. And then third is the policy and regulation. I think it's come up several times here around data sovereignty and security and privacy, and competition, all of those things have to be addressed, and it'll take time. So you have to really work through that as a long-term activity as a government and communicate effectively across, across ministries as you're doing that. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. It sounds like you're saying we're on a journey. We're not quite there yet. There is still quite a lot of work to do. One of the things which I do want to point out, especially to folk who do have a lot of questions, that the ADB does have an excellent series on cloud and enablement. So if you have questions, one of the things which you can do is just do a quick search within the ADB website for resources. And of course, you can always drop as an email. No, I won't say us, but we can drop the ADB an email to ask for resources if you haven't already found them. So thank you for that, Thomas. Dr. Boni, how about you? What are your top 3 recommendations from your experience?
Okay, let me try to figure out. I think, yeah, this is quite challenging in government sector. So we have to believe in terms of the inclusion and equality. So why we have to talk about inclusive and equality? Because in our case, infrastructure is becoming the most crucial part. We have to deploy the infrastructure throughout the countries. So inclusivity is main issues in our country. And then the equality means we have to also educate the people, giving a knowledge about the IT, internet, and all the aspects that can be give an added value. But we have to consider not only the positive thing can be get from the internet, but from the cloud system, internet. But we have to consider the drawback. That's why now we also have a national program. We call it digital literacy. This is also a part of the G20 digital economy working group. There is issues number 2 about digital skill and digital literacy. And then maybe we call it the second best practice maybe. So we have to focus on digital transformation, no matter the scale. It can be SME, small, medium enterprise, or big firms. This is like an inclusive, but this is in terms of corporation. And the third is set our goals. For me, it's about toward an interconnected nation. So during the DEWG, Digital Economy Working Group, the issue number 3 is about cross-border data flow, data free flow with trust. It's also becoming one of the most, I call it, dynamic and challenging for all members country in G20. That's why hopefully there would be kind of commonalities or agreed in some sense in terms of this issue. I think that's our idea or kind of sharing the best practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Boni. So I think that yes, differentiating between digital skills and digital literacy is definitely a bit of a challenge, especially when it comes to marketable and usable skills. I think that there were a few years ago, I was speaking with some students and teachers, and the teachers were quite horrified to realize that the students who have grown up on smartphones thought that they were digitally literate until they went out to the workforce and then had to use a laptop. And because they grew up as an iPad and phone generation, they didn't understand what this whole idea of a laptop was, which was quite surprising to some of the teachers. And then the teachers realized that, oh, maybe having just a device only policy isn't the best way to teach. They have to do an adjustment. So definitely that is something that we can be moving towards with one of the challenges. With regard to cloud adoption, definitely it's going to be very relevant, because I think that some people who think that they can code think that they can do cloud, but that may not necessarily be the case as well. So thank you for that sharing. Mary Joy, what about you? What are your top 3 best practices that you can leave with us to advise us on how we can better encourage cloud adoption?
First is the instructions to adopt cloud, and then fix the challenges when it comes to infrastructure. And of course, in the Philippine setting, we have the cloud first policy, or declaring to adopt a cloud first. It is approach for government departments and agencies to consider cloud as part of their primary infrastructure and procurement. So another thing is that the Philippines has a recently Digital Transformation Act, which also promotes and encourages cloud and data in cloud for the government. Then we also have the RA 10844 of the National Cybersecurity Plan, which is also there included critical infrastructure when it comes to cloud, no? And then of course the Data Privacy Act of 2012, RA 10173, as well as the Cybercrime Prevention Act of 2012 of RA 10175. They all talks also about clouds, its infrastructure, and its infrastructure. So in our organization, the National ICT Confederation, together with the Department of Information and Communications Technology, as well as the Department of Interior Local Government, we do a Digital Governance Award for those LGUs. We acknowledge LGUs also using cloud environment.
Thank you for that. I like that. I like that little tag that you have, infrastructure and infrastructure, which is, I think, a good delineation of how we need to start thinking and planning the different aspects of the hardware and software, and also the architecture of the system. So for those of you who are looking for advice on this, I think you can definitely ping Mary Joy. Actually, if you're looking for advice on the Philippines and the regulations which are around, I'm very impressed by the way those numbers of the regulations rolled off your tongue, Mary Joy. So the different acts that we have definitely are focused on protecting certain things, but they also do provide a bit of a challenge to us when it comes to making sure we need to be clear about where the adherence to regulation needs to be. So that is something which, again, I think all people moving on to cloud will have to definitely pay attention to. And the cloud first policy, I think, is a good first step to move along the way. One of the things which I will point out to people who are asking about cloud first policies is that they do include a lot of regulations around starting around data classification, like the types of security and the types of sensitivity of types of data. I know that Indonesia had that sort of classification as well. And there would also be specifications around the level of security that you would have to be putting in place, including recommendations for international certifications, which I know is a part of the questions. I think that one of the questions that have come in the Q&A is that if it's too expensive, then what do we do? Because it looks like international certifications might be too expensive. Well, we have to make sure that the risk and the reward is commensurate, right? If you think that your personal information is worth protecting, then I think that it's worth investing in that international security or international service that can audit and can secure your files with a verified approach. So I would say if you value your data, my recommendation would be to look into the certification, but it's always a cost benefit analysis for individual organizations. So there's no real rule unless it's part of a regulation. But most of the time, there is a baseline plus approach, which means that most governments and most companies say, this is if you want to be a vendor for us, this is the baseline that you have to have. After that, because we are a health agency or because we are a bank, therefore we need additional certifications. But if you don't have it, as a company, you probably won't go out of business. But in order to serve us, we'll probably need certain certifications. So it's not a must, but it's usually voluntary. But generally, it's good business practice to actually have that certification in place. Pak Tahir, would you say that's the approach that you would be taking for certifications and protections? What are some of your best practices that you have for us?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I've been following this discussion. It's very interesting that it seems like the data protection or the data privacy or data sovereignty. It seems like a choice between on-prem or having your own data centers versus going to the cloud. And I can, the way I see it is, it's the problem exists in two different contexts. There is data protection and data privacy in the context of infrastructure that you manage on your own. And there is these same problems in the context of cloud infrastructure, right? And the way these problems are solved on-prem or on private infrastructure has a different set of solutions. The same problems on cloud have a different set of solutions. And if my experience is it's a lot more easier to do it on the cloud than doing on-prem, because to be honest, like just by having a server within the country, it's a necessary requirement for sovereignty, but it's not sufficient. There's a lot more to it than just having infrastructure in a specific geography, right? So my yes, certifications are a good way to at least become aware of what are the challenges and the solutions available to fix those challenges related to data privacy, data protection, and sovereignty.
Thank you for that insight. Definitely it's given how many times you've talked about data privacy and that data management, I think that is definitely something which is very, very much on a lot of our minds. I'm going to turn the last couple of minutes to answer some of our questions. And let me just highlight the fact that we do have some questions that I mentioned on data sovereignty. If I'm not wrong, we are considering a separate webinar just on data sovereignty. So I'm going to have to tell the people who have asked questions to please park those questions for the next seminar, because it's actually a really, really big and really, really important topic. Again, it's very linked with data classification, and it's really linked with you taking responsibility and understanding what is it that you're asking for when it comes to data sovereignty, because there are nuances which have to be unpacked. So I will beg for your forgiveness. We won't answer those questions, but please look forward to perhaps a future webinar on this. So I'm going to turn the time turn the time to answering some of the questions. And I want to pick first Arthur, who has asked the first question, was a very brave soul, asked the first question, and then I left him hanging for a very, very long time. He asked, how can we transform something that is a habit, and can transitional computing-based systems overcome everything with cloud computing and everything that is desired from every single stakeholder? I think that this question that he asked is quite good in the sense that it recognizes that there are many, many different stakeholders in a system. We need to understand, like what Pak Boni has said, talking to the different stakeholders is a very, very important job. But the core thing is that we have to differentiate between the hardware, which is the different sections of cloud computing that you can use, from PaaS to SaaS to YaaS, and the people that you have to convince. We talked a little bit about digital literacy throughout our panel. just because you give everybody a cloud first policy and implement a cloud first policy, just because you give everybody cloud computing facilities, doesn't mean that they will immediately accept it. So there is still some persuasion, I believe, and education that needs to take place. But Tahir, I see you nodding. Have you had some experience in this? Would you say that that's actually quite an important part, to get the buy-in from your stakeholders?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question about moving from the way I see it is, the easiest way to explain it is you're moving from a CapEx model to an OpEx model, and then taking it to the limits, right? Essentially, what renting infrastructure on the cloud and being able to bill on an hourly basis or on a per second basis, exactly as much as we use it, it's not just an opportunity to try out a new technology, but it actually changes the entire cost efficiency dynamics of the company, right? It changes the way you do budgeting. Like, you do not have to, like in a traditional company, if you want to launch a new feature or a new offering or something like that, you have to start working around the CapEx budgeting, then you have to go through the procurement step and all of that kind of stuff. And with public clouds, you can just immediately spin up whatever level of infrastructure you require. And you can actually vary it according to the traffic. Like, for example, in Tokopedia, we see that a lot of purchases happen during daytime. And so our infrastructure actually inflates during the day, right? And when during nighttime, our infrastructure gets decommissioned accordingly. So all of these things, they add a lot to the cost efficiency or the budgeting dynamics. And essentially, it's a, like you said, Marianne, it's a matter of persuasion as well, and also kind of like being able to envision what would our business look like in this new way of working, which is a lot more on demand and OpEx centric rather than CapEx centric.
Thanks, Tahir. It definitely is something which needs to be balanced and made. A lot of the constituents actually made aware that these choices actually do exist. I want to thank everybody for your attention and your time, and of course our panelists for sharing all of your insight on this idea of digital inclusion. I think that we've definitely taken away some core messaging. The first, I think for me, it does appear that we do have still some way. We are all still figuring out our way towards ensuring that everybody is included. There have been a lot of questions which we've tried dealing with, which have around questions around data sovereignty, questions around the clash and conflict of laws, as I think I'm borrowing a phrase I copied from Mary Joy, the conflict of regulations and laws that are around, the need to build that consensus. I think that these are really, really important messages that we're taking away from this particular session. The thing which I think we want to make sure that everybody takes away is also this idea that there are steps that everybody does need to take. And you can see, I think, from some of the questions that have been asked, that different people are on different parts of the journey. I would say proof of concept, mapping out what you want, what you have, then mapping out where you want to go. I think it's one of the first two steps. And then after that, doing a pilot would be probably a good step to do a risk mitigation. And then you'll have to start putting in all of the other pieces, depending on your budget probably. And all of the other pieces, what I mean by that is the cybersecurity requirements, the international certifications for protection of information and etc. that you have to put in. Again, all of these usually are not, inverted commas, they're usually not mandatory, or they're usually not required, but they're almost always good to have. And it's always going to be a cost benefit analysis. Is your data worth protecting? Is your data worth buying for getting accredited to that international certification standard? Is that worth the time and the energy and the effort to keep it updated? Those are questions which can only be left as questions, because those are all business decisions which will be left up to you or the system administrator or whoever is the decision maker to answer. But all of these form part of that digital inclusion from cloud journey that I hope that we are all on. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time and attention from the panelists. That is the quick wrap up of our panelists. So thank you very much. I wish I could say round of applause, but we're all virtual, so there's no real round of applause. I'd like to turn the time now to Ms. Lily Yan Ing, who is the Area Lead Advisor on the Southeast Asia region, to give us some closing remarks. Thank you to our panel.
Thank you, Ms. Lim. On behalf of Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia area, I would like to thank all speakers, distinguished speakers that we have today, and of course, all participants who spend your time joining us at the ADB AWS Area Policy Webinar Series. I think it's really such an enlightening for everyone to learn from our discussions today. Let me start with the fact that over the last 2 years, the income of 99% of the global populations has worsened off, while the income of the top 10 richest persons has doubled, of which 8 out of 10 are technology titans. Okay. That's the fact that we are facing right now. Digital transformations is one of the most crucial innovations in our generations that changes modern human life from the way we're working and the way we are living. It's starting from electronic machinery, computer, digital technology, and recently cloud systems, including cloud computing, cloud management, and cloud-based systems, and artificial intelligence. Indeed, the pandemic COVID-19 has accelerated digital transformations and all innovations in digital-based technology. Just to give you an idea, in ASEAN, there has been an increase of about 20 million of new consumers, digital consumers, making ASEAN's having about 350 million digital consumers only in Southeast Asian regions in 2021. And by 2030, digital trade will be about 10 trillion US dollar by 2030. So we can see how huge digital trade and digital activities in our generations. But again, I just want to highlight that digital transformations can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it really makes like the market, the way we operate, the way that business, governments, individuals, it's really provide improve efficiency and improve our productivity. It makes market works very efficiently, right? It really changes the way we are doing business, how, what, and how we are operate and we are trading. But at the same time, we can also imagine there are societies, there are people, there are parts of us, there are also having disadvantages of these digital transformations. At least there are two main effects. One is displacement effects. People who are less skilled and less educated can reap disproportionately or like from the benefits of digital transformations. And the second effect is premature deindustrializations in developing countries, of which replacements of the manual work and the routine jobs by industrial robots, AI, including the recently cloud computing and cloud systems. So this is something that we have to keep in mind, that while digital transformations have provide a lot of advantages and improve our productivity, but at the same time, it also provide disadvantages for some of the society. Taking into account, as all panelists have already also mentioned, at least there are three main challenges in digital transformations, including recently in cloud systems. One that everybody agree is about private individual information and data. which are exposed to services providers, again, facing kind of regulations, but we have to make sure that private individual informations and data are well protected. This includes exchange of the data that has fueled concerns about the use and misuse of data. Second, the expansions of rapid digitalizations. This also poses with the threats, right? Threats against data, threats against systems, and threats against people. And third, we need to keep in mind that the technological advancements enable firms to produce and operate in large, massive economies at scale that build up market concentrations, right? This kind of market concentrations, if it is too large, too big, too much, too massive, that can be also barriers for MSMEs to be in the same level of playing field. And thus we need to a very careful strategy and law and regulations to ensure that we provide the same level playing field for everyone. So I think, like, from my experiences, it's very important. I think G20 is one of the most effective platforms, I should say. The second platforms could be ASEAN. Next year, Indonesia will be, this year, Indonesia is G20 chairmanship, and next year, ASEAN, Indonesia will be ASEAN chairmanships. So I think it's very important to work together the issues, particularly that speakers mentions, issues across countries, to ensure that we optimize the benefits of digital transformations, but at the same time, we also ensure that we can manage the challenges and risk appear from these digital transformations. So I think first things first, I think we need to increase the preparedness, improve preparedness, digital preparedness, to reduce digital divide across and within countries. And then the second thing is very important for us to improve the readiness for people, because at the end of the day, digital transformations, it's about people. So how each countries, particularly Indonesia and other developing countries, can be ready to embrace these changes in digital era. And the last but not least is to improve the quality of privacy and competitions or antitrust law to build better and inclusive digital transformations. I trust that we all here from the webinar that we are having today, we are learning a lot from speakers as well as questions from participants. And again, on behalf of AREA, I would like to thank all the organizing committee involved, as well as all participations from you. And we are looking forward to hosting for another webinar. Thank you so much.